Hello, beautiful souls. And thank you so much for dropping by this channel. My name's Arthur. Many of you are returning people who've been by this channel before, know a little bit about me or what this channel is about, but I'm specifically making this video for anyone who's new. Though I think those who are familiar will get a lot out of it. What I want to say is, my journey from recovering from Neo-Advaita, it started in 2004. In 2004, so I got involved in Neo-Advaita in 1998. By 2004, I knew something was wrong, but I was still very stuck. But it wasn't until stuck in it, and I just kept going back to it. It wasn't until 2018 that I was able to exit it. But exiting was just the beginning. In 2019, I began the process of healing. And that I did that by starting to study some traditional Advaita. But it was very slow going. And I'm giving you this timeline to let you know that it doesn't have to take you as long as it did me. And that's part of what, I started this channel because I was pissed and I was hurt and I was angry. And I continue to make these videos because I want to save people time, because it doesn't have to take as long as it took me. And then I started to recover in 2019, and then I got really serious in 2022. And from there, it took me another roughly year and a half. I'll have to check my timeline there, but I think that's right. You have to check my timeline. But so I'm sharing all this to say, I don't want to scare anyone, but if you went deep down the Neo-Advaita hole, and I did, it's not an easy thing to recover from, because it really is brainwashing. Neo-Advaita, and I said yes to the information, so I can't blame Neo-Advaita. Neo-Advaita brainwashed me into thinking that life was an illusion, that I didn't exist, my feelings didn't matter, my goals didn't matter, nothing in life mattered. The only thing that mattered was enlightenment. I didn't have to do anything except practice self-inquiry to achieve enlightenment. All other teachings were false. Focusing on anything other than self-inquiry was a waste of time. Desires were bad or wrong. And that all I was this ethereal, floating consciousness that I was just, but see, Neo-Advaita really, the way they present, because a traditional teacher will say you are consciousness, but the way Neo-Advaita teachers present it, it's like this emptiness. They'll say consciousness, but if you listen closely, they don't really talk about the Ananda aspect, and they don't talk much about the fullness. Some of them do, but they talk about consciousness in this way that it's just like this empty nothingness. Some of the more crazy, radical Neo-Advaita teachers will say everything's predetermined, you can't do anything, like all these very intense ideas that fundamentally altered my relationship with myself, life, God, desires, the meaning of life, like everything. See, Neo-Advaita gets at the root of what it is to be a human being and what the spiritual life is, and twists them all up. And then it does it in this weird way where it creates what I call a mind maze that it's very hard to get yourself out of. So I don't share, again, I'm not trying to scare anyone, but I am saying it's a process. It's not an overnight thing. Now, if you didn't go so far down, then it can be and some people are just starting to dip into Neo-Advaita and they're like, this feels wrong. and then they'll bump into my channel or someone else, and I'm not the only one who talks about Neo-Advaita, and they'll just be like, "Yeah, they're right. This stuff is BS," and then they're done because they didn't go so deep in it. Um, one person I worked with, he went kind of light to medium, and we had to have a solid like 3 conversations for him to just put it all behind. So that wasn't too bad. Um, and so I'm still trying to figure out and come up with not so much a formula, but like what worked for me and then share that. So for those who've gone really far down, first of all, I feel you. I think what really sums it up for me is I met someone who they went really far down. And one day they were talking, they were just thinking, they're like, "Oh my God, I'm suffering. I need help." And then their Neo-Advaita voice in their head said, "That's impossible. You can't suffer. You're consciousness." And the person said, "Well, yeah, but I'm really suffering. I need help." The Neo-Advaita voice in their head said, "Well, if you just realize that you don't exist, all your suffering will vanish." Well, okay, I've heard that in Sat, and then this is them. Like, okay, I've heard that in Satsang, but I'm really suffering. I'm really lost. I'm confused. I need help. That's not possible. You're consciousness. You're already free. And so they didn't seek out help. Eventually they did. They were able to break out of that loop. But that's kind of the insanity that Neo-Advaita can install an insanity into us. And then, I had my part in accepting the insanity. And that's been a whole part of my journey is, initially I was blaming and attacking Neo-Advaita when I had my part. Uh, so So I've posted on my website a model or a map for how to recover from Neo-Advaita. I think it's a little outdated. I've got some new ideas I'm working on that I'll post there when the time is right. Um, a big thing and so I'm just going to share now the big things that helped me. Number one was reconnecting to people and declaring, "I need connection to people." So that's when the healing really started, was when I said, "I need," because Neo-Advaita will teach you that you don't need anything. And it's true on a certain level, but it's not true on another level. And if taught too soon, it's actually very dangerous and harmful. So first of all, me just declaring like I need connection with people, because Neo-Advaita will kind of trick you into trying to live like a monk or nun. So that part was huge. Studying actual traditional Advaita, and I've got some links on my website. For me, it started with reading the Bhagavad Gita, with knowing something about the Bhagavad Gita, then reading something by Ramana Maharshi called the Upadesha Saram. But that's kind of hard unless you kind of have a little bit of an education. But you'll see right from the start that it's very different. Ramana starts in a very different place. He doesn't start with self-inquiry. He teaches things to lead to it. Then I studied some of James Schwartz's stuff, who studied with a very traditional teacher named Swami Dhyanananda. The next phase in my recovery was I did, it's called attachment healing work. It's this broad spectrum for healing work, whether it be generally it's with a therapist, a specific kind of healing work, where yes, it's professional, but you form a relationship in which you bond with the professional. And that was huge for me. because I mean, I could spend hours talking about how important that was. That was needed for me, also partially because of early childhood trauma. Everyone may not need that. The next step for me was really studying traditional Advaita with a teacher. First, I studied with someone who wasn't a guru per se, but had studied with a traditional guru. And next, I actually studied with a traditional guru. And I'm still doing that now. And so that was life-changing, because traditional Advaita looks nothing like Neo-Advaita. And when I say nothing, I mean nothing. Very life-affirming, will give you wisdom for how to live life, and teaches all the preparations for self-inquiry. Another thing which I hesitate to mention because it's kind of potentially controversial, but it really helped me, so I am going to mention it, is ketamine. For those of you who don't know, ketamine is a medicine that's used for PTSD, a wide range of things: anxiety, depression, PTSD. There's different approaches to it. There's large doses, which leads to not really a psychedelic journey, but leads to a place of deep insight, almost as in it connects you to your higher mind. And that was profound for me. It didn't help immediately. It took about 6 months about doing, and I did this, with a doctor. Like, I didn't go like find ketamine on the street. Like, it was a very legitimate program. But that was really helpful. It gave me access to wisdom that started to plant seeds that actually led to me studying with the two traditional teachers. I don't know if the ketamine for me just sped things up. I hope eventually I would have, but and another huge piece for me is getting involved in bhakti, and getting involved with bhakti is the practice of worship and devotion, and finding life-affirming spiritual things, and finding hobbies as well. I'd say the hobbies were more of a little bit of like a self-help thing. But part of it is learning how to take care of your relative self and finding support groups. And so those are the things that really led to recovery for me. And now I'm in the phase of really getting clear of like, okay, well, what do I want to do with my life? And that's a whole nother process, because Neo-Advaita will fragment. If you go deep in it, it will fragment your personality, and you kind of have to rebuild yourself. And so it's very difficult. I have all these things I want to do, but my personality, I literally have to rebuild my personality, is not really strong enough yet for really big undertakings. Like, there's some things I can do and some things I have done. And so those are my thoughts for this evening. And if you're new to all this, I know it can sound daunting. Now, here's the other thing. Here's what Neo-Advaita teachers will not tell you. There is grace. There is a higher power. Each of you are free to define it. I'm going to speak in my own experience. I'm not going to preach here, but in my experience, there is a higher power that guides things. Like, I was guided to the ketamine. Like, at that point in time, my life was going good, and my recovery from Neo-Advaita was going good. And then I saw an ad for it on Facebook, and I'm like, I think I'm going to do that. And I didn't even know why. And once I started doing it, then so many things fell in place. So, like, many things fell in place. So that sounds a little religious, like, right? Grace, higher power. But Ramana spoke about grace often. And in traditional Advaita, they talk about grace. They talk about God in a very different way than what they'll talk about in church. Now, ultimately, they say, yes, you are one and the same with God, but it's approached in a very different way than in your average Neo-Advaita satsang. So all of this can sound daunting, and you're not alone. There is a higher power, and each of us is free to define that higher power how we will. For some of us, some people, that higher power is just their higher self. Some people, universe, some people, God, some people have a specific spiritual or religious orientation. But there really is a grace. Ramana Maharshi said, help is always available. We just have to learn how to accept it and how to tune into it. The second part is me. He said, help is always available. In my experience, we just have to learn how to tune into it and feel it and listen to it. And that's going to be different for each person. Thank you so very much to anyone who's new or anyone who's returning, any returning subscribers. I wish everyone a blessed evening. Take care.